Welcome to the module on the infinitive and the imperative forms. We'll be covering chapter 32 and 33 in your textbook on mounts. On the screen in front of you is chapter 32 material. We'll go over the infinitive mood. The infinitive mood in English is often rendered with the phrase to, and then you have the verb. So whether it's to loose, as in luo, or to run, or to jump, or to fly, the infinitive forms in English are often rendered with the simple translation to plus the verb. But in Greek, actually, while to plus the verb is one option of translation, it's not the best option. Oftentimes, the infinitive forms are translated in English as clauses. So we'll go over the details of translations in a bit, but now we need to go over the forms. And the forms for the infinitive are actually simple, and they're not a lot. We'll be covering the present tense forms, the aorist forms, which have a first and second aorist form, and then the perfect forms. I think these suffix endings to form the infinitive will be clearer to you if we do some examples. So let's go over the present infinitive. The present infinitive for the active, if I use lu as a paradigm, so the stem is lu, would be luane. And the most simple translation would be to loose, but since this is a present tense stem, it actually has the meaning sometimes of continue to loose. That's where you get the progressiveness of or the continuous aspect being translated in English. So while to loose is an acceptable translation, to distinguish it from the aorist translation, I think what we'll need to do is in parentheses use continue to remind you that any present tense form, the aspect or the kind of action is the continuous action. The middle form is lu plus the suffix ending, so it's lu esthai. And then the passive would be continue to be loosed. And those are the forms. So let's say the present active middle passive infinitive, luane, lu esthai, lu esthai. What about the first aorist infinitive? You take lu, and then the sigma signals to you that it is first aorist, and then you take the infinitive tense formative I, and so together it's luci, and that tells you that it's the aorist active infinitive. The aorist middle infinitive is lu sasthai. So notice that it retains the aorist tense formative and it adds the middle infinitive suffix ending, so lu sasthai. And the passive form, which is in aorist tense, the middle and passive forms have their own unique forms, whereas in the present tense, the perfect tense, and the imperfect tenses, the middle and passive forms are the same. We have lu plus thenai. So let's say the first aorist, the most commonly used form of the aorist infinitive, the active middle passive forms together. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Luci, lusesthai, luthenai. Now, what if we have a second aorist form for a given verb? Rather than the first aorist indicative, the principal part is a second aorist indicative. Well, if it's second aorist in the indicative, it will be second aorist in the infinitive. And we're going to use lambano for the active voice, ginomai, a nice deponent word for the middle voice, and grapho for the passive voice. And recall that the second aorist form, the principal part is a laban. So we're going to be using lab as our stem. So you have lab, and then we're going to use the second aorist suffix ending. So labane is to receive, and then ginomai its second aorist form is agenomen. So that's its second aorist form. So gen is the stem. So we have gen plus s-thigh, and that's to become. And then for grapho, its second aorist passive form is a graphane. So graph is the stem. And so we have grapheni, or to be written. And so let's say labane to receive, genesthai to become, and grapheni, the passive, to be written. Together, 1, 2, 3. Labane, genesthai, grapheni. And lastly, for the perfect tense, we can go back to our paradigmatic verb luo. While there's no augment in the infinitive, because there's no sense of time built into non-indicative moods, we do have reduplication. So here's my reduplication. Here's my stem. There is no connecting vowel, and I use the active infinitive, perfect active infinitive suffix, kenai. So lelu kenai is to have loosed. Lelu, and there's no connecting vowel. Loose thigh is to have loosed oneself or itself, and then loose thigh, same form, but if we translate this passively, it will be to have been loosed. Loose thigh. So let's say these forms together. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Lelukenai, lelusai, lelusai. And those are the infinitive forms. Okay, here are some grammar notes about the infinitive. It's not a lot, but you need to know this. Just a reminder that the infinitive, because it's non-indicative, like all non-indicative moods, has no sense of time built in. And instead, the infinitives emphasize the aspect. So the present tense, you have the continuous aspect being emphasized. The aorist tense emphasizes the undefined aspect, and the perfect tense likes to emphasize the stative or the effect of an action as its aspect. And then when you parse, the parsing is much simpler because we often translate the infinitive as to loose in its most simplest form when it's not used in a sentence and you have a single word. Probably to loose is the best way to translate it. But when we use it in a sentence, you're going to learn to translate this into a clause. There are only 3 parsing elements. There's the tense, there's the voice, and there's the mood. So this is luane is a present active infinitive. Those 3 parsing elements, tense, voice, mood, add the lexical form, add the simple inflected translation, and that's how you parse the infinitive. Friendly reminder that enai is the infinitive for emi. So emi's infinitive form is enai. And lastly, when just like in the participle, we have something called the genitive absolute for the infinitive. So this is only for the infinitive form. We have something called the accusative absolute. So when you have a main sentence or clause, the nominative case is what's used for the subject. But if you have a participle, if you want a separate subject for the participle verb, that's in the genitive, what we call the genitive absolute. And now we're learning that if you want to have a separate subject for the infinitive, it uses what we call the accusative absolute. So the infinitive takes an accusative noun as its subject. So you have to be careful here, because sometimes you might have 2 accusative nouns being used in a sentence, and it's part of the infinitive phrase. So you have to decide, well, which one's the subject, which one is the direct object if you have two accusative nouns as part of the infinitive phrase. Well, there again, it's context. What makes most sense? But let's make it simple and just have one accusative here. So this is a new vocabulary word that you're learning this week. De means it is necessary. Now here's a great example of why you just simply cannot default to es theain. That by itself it means to eat. But you're not going to translate it as to eat. It is necessary to eat. Because look at the accusative pronoun here. It's she or her. And you might be tempted, well, should I translate that as it is necessary to eat her? While grammatically that's a possibility, likely, the author is not prescribing cannibalism. And so this here, autain, just because of what the sentence means, cannot possibly be the direct object of the sentence. Here, this has to be the accusative absolute. Autain, she, is the subject of this infinitive phrase. Then how do we render this into English? We turn the infinitive phrase into a clause. So the best translation for this, it is necessary that, I'm going to use the word that she continues to, I'm going to put that in parentheses, that she continues to eat. Or it is necessary that she eats. That she eats. So it is necessary that she eats. The idea, the meaning is that because it's a present infinitive, it has a continuous sense. So you could translate this as it is necessary that she continues to eat. And that makes much more sense than it is necessary to eat her. And that concludes our review of the forms. And in the next instructional video, we'll go over how to translate the infinitive.